Let me tell you something strange about self-sabotage. We live in a world that celebrates success, growth, confidence, forward motion. Yet some people get closest to what they want and then quietly step away, not dramatically, not consciously, almost gently. And here is the question that always lingers beneath the surface. Why do we sometimes become the one thing standing between ourselves and the life we say we want? At first glance, self-sabotage looks like fear, laziness, a lack of discipline. People assume it's about not trying hard enough, but that's not the full picture. Beneath the surface, there's an entire psychology at play, one that has less to do with failure and more to do with protection. See, for some people, sabotaging their own success isn't self-hatred, it's self-preservation. You move forward, you make progress, things start aligning, and suddenly, something in you hesitates. You procrastinate, you delay, you find reasons to stop just short of arrival. From the outside, it looks irrational, but inside, it feels necessary. As if crossing that invisible threshold would cost you something you're not ready to lose. In daily life, this shows up quietly. You abandon projects right before completion. You downplay opportunities that could change your life. You stay in familiar discomfort rather than risk unfamiliar freedom. You tell yourself you're being realistic, careful, thoughtful. But beneath that logic, there's a deeper tension between who you are and who success would require you to become. Psychologists have found something fascinating here. When people approach success, it doesn't always activate joy. Sometimes it activates threat, because success isn't just gain. It's exposure, visibility, responsibility, change, and change, even positive change, can feel unsafe to a nervous system that learns stability through limitation. It's not about wanting to fail. It's about fearing what success might disrupt. But here's what's often misunderstood. People who self-sabotage aren't confused about their goals. They're conflicted about their identity. Success challenges the story you've learned to survive by. It asks you to outgrow coping mechanisms that once protected you. And part of you resists not because you're weak, but because that old version of you kept you alive. So you hesitate, you second guess, you unconsciously restore balance by returning to what's familiar. We live in a culture that treats success as universally desirable. More is better, faster is better, higher is better. But rarely do we talk about the emotional cost of expansion, about what happens when your external life grows faster than your internal sense of safety. For some, the pattern begins after emotional burnout. Not a dramatic breakdown, but a quiet realization. You've achieved things before, you've proven yourself. And instead of relief, you felt pressure. Instead of fulfillment, you felt exposed. So when success approaches again, your system remembers. And it pulls the brakes. Here's the deeper mechanism beneath this. Psychologists sometimes call it identity incongruence. When your achievements begin to conflict with your self-concept, tension arises, not consciously, but somatically. In the body, in the nervous system, you may say you want more. But if more means being seen, being judged, being responsible for outcomes, you may also be reliving old moments where visibility wasn't safe, where being noticed meant being criticized, or abandoned, or expected to carry more than you could hold. So your mind creates distance, you miss deadlines, you lose momentum. You tell yourself you'll start again later, and later feels safer than now. Because let's be honest, most of us didn't learn how to succeed gently. We learned how to endure, we learned how to cope, we learned how to stay small enough to survive. And when life finally offers us expansion, the body asks a quiet question. Is it safe to grow, or should we retreat? This is where the paradox begins. Self-sabotage looks like self-destruction, but often it's misplaced loyalty, loyalty to an old version of you, loyalty to family systems that taught you not to outshine, loyalty to identities built around struggle, humility, or invisibility. So you stall not because you don't believe in yourself, but because success feels like betrayal of your past, of your pain, of who you had to be to belong. And maybe that's why self-sabotage feels so confusing, because part of you is reaching forward, while another part is holding on. Because think about it. When was the last time you felt fully at ease with things going well? When was the last time success didn't come with guilt, anxiety, or the sense that something bad might follow? If that question feels uncomfortable, it reveals something important. Not everyone who sabotages themselves is afraid of failing. Some are afraid of staying visible, staying responsible, staying in a life that no longer allows retreat. But this isn't always conscious. Sometimes it's subtle. A shift in energy, a loss of motivation, a sudden disinterest in what once mattered. The psyche finds ways to regulate itself when growth feels overwhelming. There's also an existential layer here. Success forces us to confront authorship. If your life improves, you can no longer blame circumstances entirely. You have to decide, choose, take ownership. And for some, that level of agency feels heavier than limitation. In a world that glorifies achievement, choosing safety over expansion like weakness. But beneath that choice is a deep intelligence. A system trying to protect itself from rupture. Here's where things get more complex. Not all self-sabotage comes from fear. Some comes from misalignment. From chasing versions of success that were never truly yours. Goals inherited rather than chosen. Dreams absorbed rather than felt. So when you approach them, something in you resists, not because you're broken, but because you're listening. This is where the paradox sharpens. You sabotage not because you don't want fulfillment, but because you want the right kind. And yet, constant retreat carries its own cost. Over time, unfinished cycles accumulate. Regret seeps in quietly. Not loud enough to force change, but heavy enough to drain meaning. You begin to distrust yourself, to wonder why momentum never lasts. Studies suggest that chronic self-sabotage is linked to heightened nervous system vigilance. The mind stays alert, anticipating threat even in positive situations. Dopamine spikes during pursuit, but drops sharply near completion. The system prefers anticipation to arrival, because arrival means exposure, and exposure requires grounding. Depth without grounding becomes anxiety. Awareness without safety becomes paralysis. But maybe the invitation here isn't to push harder. Maybe it's to slow down enough to listen, because self-sabotage isn't an enemy. It's information, a signal pointing to unmet needs. Unintegrated identities, parts of you that don't yet feel included in the future you're building. Sometimes the work isn't to eliminate sabotage but to understand what it's protecting. Maybe that's what real self-trust looks like. Not forcing progress, but creating conditions where progress feels safe. Where success doesn't require self-abandonment. Where growth includes the parts of you that learn to survive by holding back. And maybe some forms of success need to be redefined. Less about visibility, more about congruence. Less about achievement, more about alignment. Because in the end, we don't sabotage what truly belongs to us. We resist what asks us to become someone we don't yet feel safe being. So if you've ever felt yourself slow down right as things were improving, if you've ever wondered why momentum slips through your fingers, if you've ever felt torn between wanting more and staying familiar, maybe there's nothing wrong with you. Maybe your system is asking for gentleness before expansion, safety before visibility, integration before arrival. And maybe the deepest success isn't reaching the top at all costs, but learning how to stay with yourself when you get there. Because the goal was never just to succeed. It was to arrive without leaving yourself behind.